Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to another of our seminar in our series, the CSPS Social Policy Seminars. Today, we are talking about concepts that I hope CSPS students in particular will recognize. The idea of policy entrepreneurs in particular, and how they influence the process of policy change. The entire title, which you have in front of you, is Policy Entrepreneurs and Policy Change in Developing Countries, Analysis of the Developments of the National Community Water Sanitation Policy Reform Framework in Ghana. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce the presenter, Dr. Salomey Jemfi Afrifa, who is a researcher in public policy, administration, and development. She has 15 years of experience in project management and has undertaken monitoring and evaluation assignments with local, international, and donor funding agencies. She currently teaches at the International Institute of Social Studies, ISS. She teaches evaluation of development policies, programs, and projects. And she's also part of the team that teaches the Sustainable Local Economic Development course at the Institute for Housing and Urban Development, and also at ISS. She obtained her PhD degree on the processes of institutional change in small town water supply systems in Ghana at IISS at Erasmus University. That's the International Institute of Social Studies at Erasmus University. I think she just really combines very nicely research, teaching, and practice. And it's exactly the kind of person that we like to hear from, to give us an insight both into the concepts, the theory, but real life on the ground realities of what it means to try to do policy. I hope Salomey, Dr. Afrifa, will say a bit more about how maybe she got involved in this particular project. I talk to my students about the me-search and research. There's always a reason why some research topic or agenda fascinates us, and I'm sure there's a story behind that. So maybe you can start with that and then go straight into your presentation for 30 to 40 minutes, which will leave us just enough time for good conversation around your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Nana Ikuya. Thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation today. I am an alumni of University of Ghana. I had my first degree and also my second degree at University of Ghana. So I hope I'm loud enough.
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
So I'm an alumni, so I'm very used to the system over there. And before undertaking the PhD, I worked as a planner, so you could get where the whole thing started. So I worked as a planner at the district assembly. So I acted as a planning officer at two districts, Kobu West and also South Municipal Assembly. And during my my master's at the public administration, that is where the whole idea of going to the PhD then became necessary, because I was working at the planning, I was not really seeing, and there was a lot of policies, I was not really seeing things how I'm supposed to see. And then the whole idea of trying to do the PhD then started really. I was really so interested. I need to do the PhD. Because I was going for a lot of conferences then. I realized that no, there is a missing gap in which I really need to fill in. And that is how the whole idea of PhD then came in. I went to do so. University of Ghana, we are doing a good work there. Thank you very much for everything. So before going into the PhD, I was there. Then, you know, in the district assembly, we have so many posts and positions, so many of them is like, you do almost everything. You do water, you do health, you do everything. So I was the project coordinator for the water, that is for small town rural water systems. And so I implemented a national community water and sanitation program. And if you look at my PhD, then I looked at the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. So this particular presentation is the aftermath of the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. And so if you look at it carefully, it's a policy reform which started around the 2017. 2017, and they started implementing some of this particular reform in few communities. It is not all the communities, it's just a few. They are piloting for now, so the policy is passed in Parliament. So I labeled my presentation as policy entrepreneurs and policy change, so we can have a little bit nuanced about issues of concepts. So for policy entrepreneurs, policy entrepreneurs are actors that try to bring in change in the way policy, they try to make changes to the policy of a particular policy. Let me use that particular word. Just a minute, so the whole idea of policy, it's like it's not anything so strange. It's not anything, but it's like policy entrepreneurs are actors that mostly work with the government organizations. Or some will also say not necessarily working with the government organization. There are also people from outside the government organizations, but they're able to use their influence, they're able to use their position, they're able to use both their political and social position to make changes to a specific policy. The whole idea is that policy change is a very difficult and challenging moment where we have a lot of interest, we have a lot of resistance coming from various groups, especially in this particular one, we have the Small Town Water Association groups, and we have other interest groups like the like the private sector that were providing services for the small town water system and the rest. So bringing a policy where you want CWSA want to employ their own staff to manage the water system, of course, they are not going to get the kind of money they want to make. So therefore, they're going to resist. So as a policy entrepreneurs, because they have their powers and because they are well placed politically, and because they also have that political, support, they are able to use their influence, which we can say that this influence comes in the form of resources, which can be either, when I talk about resources, we are talking about they are knowledgeable, they have the skills, they are professionals, and they also have the political connection to push forward to ensure that a particular policy, they try to ensure that the policy, they bring in new policy, or they try to make changes or allow a particular policy to be changed. So when we talk about policy entrepreneurs, that is that is who they are and also what they do. And when you look at most of our literature, issues of policy entrepreneurs are not really discussed, especially from a developing country point of view. And that's why I found a lot of interest to use this particular concept to explain my findings or to explain the program or the policy change in the small town and rural water sector. But as I have explained, when we talk about policy entrepreneurship or policy entrepreneur, we normally don't look at the structure and the institutional and the agency level enabling conditions. In other words, when you look at the policy entrepreneur, we don't look at other factors that allow them to make the change, like the structure and also the institutional issues as to their position in the society, issues of formal and informal rules, and how these together inform policy actors to be able to make change or to be able to resist change. So when I talk about policy change, it is not necessarily just about changing a policy towards a particular angle, but also resisting a particular policy change. Let me move a little bit away from water, and let's talk about like the yield levy. The yield levy, you could see how much a lot of people resisted it, how a lot of people put in a lot of, I mean, you know what the politicians did as far as the e-levy are concerned, both on the NDC side and also on the NPP side. We're talking about the mobile people, we're talking about the private sectors, we're talking about intellectuals, and everyone had a say as far as the e-levy is concerned. So the issue is that when you look at the e-levy, for example, when you talk about policy entrepreneurs, it's who are the people who really brought in this e-levy? Who are the main actors that are involved, that push through to ensure that this e-levy came in? Is it Bawumia with his issues about digitalizing everything in the country, about everything and going to the kind of sports and paying for the for tickets and for watching football and the rest? This is what we're talking about. People within politics, they can be outside of government, they can be inside of government, but how they're able to use their position to influence a policy or influence to be able to make changes, then we can describe such a person as policy entrepreneurs. I hope I've made justice to the concept of policy entrepreneur. So again, so for this particular paper, I'm talking about policy entrepreneurs and policy change. And one of the things which I've already talked about is that the policy entrepreneurs, they normally have social position of the organization within the policy network, and they have strong policy capacity and enable policy entrepreneurship. When we talk about entrepreneurship, it's the activities, what they do at the end of the day. And sometimes they can be at the individual level with high social status, which I've explained already. And they also have the elite position within an organization. In this particular paper, there was one person who is in the person of Dr. Walanavo. The name is not even come. It will come later. He is in charge. Let me use his position, which is easier. The Chief Executive Officer for Community Water and Sanitation Agency. And I'm going to explain along the line. So he, in particular, he is a policy entrepreneur. That's how I describe him. And he uses social status and also elite position as the chief executive officer to influence this particular change in the water sector. So most of the time, these policy entrepreneurs, their social position, they're able to use their social position because of key resources like this, because they are credible, because they can be trusted, because they have the respect, they have the prestige, and also they have the legitimacy, and they have knowledge of policy matters, and also their leadership and team building skills, and enable them to be successful. And as I move along the line, when I'm using my case to explain, we can be able to appreciate the concept very well. Sorry, I'm moving around the segment. Okay, yeah. So, so the main contribution for this particular paper is to contribute towards the debates by focusing on how the complementarities between the structures, institution, and also organization, and also the agency level enabling condition influence the strategies they employed by the Community Water and Sanitation Agency. What I'm trying to say is that how did the organization as community water per se, the institutional factors around, and also the agency of the actors within community water, and also other political actors were able to influence the national government to make changes to the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. So what I'm trying to explain here is that before the National Community Water and Sanitation Policy Reform Framework, in Ghana, we always have long names, which is normal. There was the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. And that is, the program had a lot of challenges. And that is why the CEO and other actors felt that there was a need for them to make changes as far as the policy on small town is concerned, so that they can be able to introduce new ways of managing the water sector. So for my research question, I looked at how the leadership of the CWSA managed to develop and institutionalize the reform despite resistance from community water managers and also water groups, which I've explained, and how the leadership of community water used the challenges and opportunities confronting the water sector to shape the strategies to promote the policy change, and what contextual factors encourage the emergence of the leadership as policy entrepreneurs to successfully pilot the program in 168 among the 168 water systems in Ghana. So before I continue explaining what the policy are, that is the other one, the longer one, which is the National Community Water and Sanitation Policy Reform Framework. So it's that we had the National Community Water and Sanitation Program, and this was the institutional arrangement where we have the development partners, we have the various ministries, we have the district assembly, we have the works department, the community water that are supposed to ensure that they coordinate the district assembly, and the district assembly coordinate the water and sanitation management team, and the water and sanitation management team coordinate the other personnel involved as far as water management is concerned. So that is the institutional arrangement here under the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. However, in the development, the main reason why the National Community Framework was established was because of the challenges involved in the National Community Water and Sanitation Program, which was both technical, financial, and institutional. And these factors was further made worse due to population growth, rapid urbanization, migration, and the rest. And this increased demand for clean water and the gap widened between those who had access to water and those who do not have access to water. I will explain this further on. What I'm trying to explain is that under the National Community Water and Sanitation Program, there was a lot of challenges as far as implementation of this particular water system. The water, and those of you who have never, I don't know where you live, but some communities do not have the Ghana water passing through they don't have the Ghana water. But normally when you move down to the various rural communities and the small town systems, like for example in Accra, Abokobi, for example, is under the small town water system. Abokobi, and also when you go to Dodowa, you also use the small town water system. That is for Accra. And when you move into the various regions, they have more, mostly in the capitals like Uamasi, Draso, and all those, they use small town water system. So under the National Community Water and Sanitation Program, we have people who have been employed, like they talk about the whole issue about ownership, where the community are supposed to provide, have their own management group, and this management group are supposed to manage the water system. So under the first reform, it is the community who manages the water system, and the district assembly is supposed to coordinate and ensure that they are working. And as usual, you know, at the district assembly, how they also work. And under the group that have been formed, they are supposed to employ people to manage the water system. So the management system, that is the water and sanitation management system, it's a voluntary, group. They are not paid, they just get some allowances, and they employ people, and those who are employed are paid at the end of the month. So they employ about 5 or 6 or 7 people. They have revenue collectors, they have accountants, they have the system manager, they have the technicians, and they also have revenue collectors, and they also have those who manage the water, the taps. Like the picture, you could see from the picture, this is a typical, this is a vendor, and the person fetches, she collects the money and pays to the revenue collectors at the water and sanitation management team office. So that is the institutional arrangement. However, one of the challenges that we found was that the reform was not really successful, in the sense that the water and sanitation management team did not have the capacity involved to manage the water system. Secondly, their position was voluntary. As a result of that, they did not really care what happens to the water. Another thing is that we also realized that we have the traditional chiefs. We have powerful people in the community. We have the country hini, the Jansika hini, and every hini you can talk about who can detect and tell the water and sanitation management team that, please, we don't want you in this community, move yourself away. We need this particular person to manage the water system. The water vendors, sometimes we are Ghanaians, so you understand what I'm trying to say. The person put behind the tap to collect the money is the cousin or the niece or the auntie of the chief, or is the niece or the auntie of the political communication officer, the party communication officer in the community, or is the chief or the niece of a powerful person in the community, or the unit committee member is the niece or the chief, or the nephew or the daughter or the son or the auntie, or we also have the assemblyman. So all these contexts, all these factors in the community did not really allow things to work out very well. We are talking about water, we are talking about resources, we are talking about situations where people need to be accountable, but where we have these institutional factors influencing what goes on in the community, definitely we are not going to get good results. And that is what I found out from my PhD thesis, that you realize that these institutional factors coming from the community did not allow the water and sanitation management team and also the personnel to work very well. Apart from that, most of the people did not have the skills. Most of the people that were also managing the water system as like technicians, as technical staff, as finance officers, did not even also have the skills. Someone said that, so I want to, because I'm related to someone, they put the person in the position here. And we are talking about water system, and you can see here, this is the water system that is quite technical, has its own challenges. And because of that, we realized that the water system, the quality of water services was falling day in and day out. And this is a reform that was implemented in the 1990s. So based on a number of evidence and based on a number of, we realized that the evidence and also the research that was done realized that 10% of the water facilities did not just offer basic services. And 30% of the water system has completely broken down. And 60% were not delivering water services at all. And when we're talking about water services, you understand what I'm talking about. The water doesn't come today, it will come tomorrow, it will not come. People, it is water quality issues. And when water breaks down, they don't even have money to manage it, because money that is collected are not even put into the accounts. It is if someone is borrowing the money. There were some cases in some of the communities, the chiefs were borrowing the money, the water and sanitation management team were borrowing the money, the communication officer is borrowing the money, and everything is in everything is pacha. There's nothing moving on. And this is something from the 1990s. So you realize that the problem then was becoming more and more. So that is where the whole idea of trying to reform the policy or the program then became urgent, became a priority. And that is where Mr. Walanyo, who was then Mr. Walanyo, before becoming the CEO for Community Water, was an engineer in the Northern region. I think Upper East or Upper West. He was an engineer, and he has been with CWSA for a very long time. So he understands the situation. He knows what is going on. He has the technical skills. He has the professional skills. And when the NPP came into government, he had the opportunity to be made the chief executive officer. And of course, if you have been an officer and you know the challenges going on in your organization, and you have been given a political position and you cannot use it to be able to make things better, then we don't know. But he was able to do that. When he came, he knew the problem already going on, but because the political willpower was not there, issues of policy change, it's it's not something that you can do easily. I mean, look at what the yield levy did. And what is it still doing? So you can realize that if you want to make changes, we have a lot of people with political interest. We have people with interest and they will fight it. And therefore, you need people with position that can be able to make policy change possible. So in this situation, Mr. Walanyo, who then had worked before, and now the chief executive officer, was able to use his position to be able to work around and ensure that the policy come into effect, because now he have access to cabinet, he have access to the politicians, he have access to the ministers, and he have access to higher position people. And when you talk about the policy, you also need the resources to be able to implement. And this is where I say Walanyo is a perfect example of a policy entrepreneur. So the objective of this reform, which then CW also came together. They've already been talking about reforms in the water sector, but they never had the opportunity to make the changes. So this reform or the framework was to show how the water system is supposed to be managed, this as compared to the past, what is being done. So the objective of the new reform now is to ensure that CWSA now becomes a utility organization committed to the efficient delivery of safe water and also enabled to have an affordable and sustainable water in Ghana. So in line with the objective, CWSA will expand its mandate to include the direct management of the pipe water system and shift from the community management model to as a utility-based organization and have a direct access and direct management. So now let me break it down. With this new framework, what is going to happen is that the case where we have the water and sanitation management managing the water system and employing people to manage the water system, which is the water and sanitation management team is a voluntary organization. They are not paid, they just do what they want to do. People have their own jobs and they just use it as part-time. It is no longer the case. Now, CWSA is going to have that role like what we have with Ghana Water. You know, Ghana Water, you cannot just go to the community and say that I'm bringing someone to be employed. No, Ghana Water have their structure. They have their how do you call it? They have their plans. They have the organizational hierarchy and also structure, how they employ people, how they pay people. All those things are supposed to be there. The same way, under the new framework, CWSA is now going to ensure that in every small town water system, and also later on, they also try to look at the boreholes. That one I wouldn't expect. I'm only focusing on the small town water system. They are going to employ people to manage the small town water system. So they are going to take away the water team and they will have no influence. So they will employ people into the community to manage the water system. And money, resources then goes to community water and they will pay their staff. That is the whole idea with the new framework. So they will move away from the community management model where we talk about the community taking care of their water system. But water is complex, water is complicated, but the institutional issues, the problems in the communities and other things will not allow community management model to be successful. And a lot of research have shown that the model is not successful because of a number of reasons, like the ownership issue, like issues of volunteerism, where people have to volunteer, and therefore of course, if you are volunteering for something, you don't have, you cannot be responsible most of the time. You cannot be bothered about a lot of things. Those other aspects needs to be issues of technical capacity, issues of all those things need to be streamlined. So under the framework, this is the new changes that is going to happen. So the specific objectives of the reform, I'm looking at my time. I think I have about 10 minutes more. 8 minutes, let me run up. It's to professionalize the management system, improve efficiency, mobilize revenue for maintenance, increase water coverage, create jobs for the unemployed water management professionals, apply technology to reduce non-revenue water. And these are some of the things and objectives they want to professionalize the management of the rural water so that professionals are going to manage the water system, but not a voluntary or something that people just come in, walk in and go out. No. So what are some of my findings? The key strategies adopted is the ability to frame problems and act strategically. What I'm trying to say is that for a policy entrepreneur to be able to make changes to policy, the enabling environment, the enabling conditions need to be there. So for example, what are the factors that is the contextual factors that allowed the CEO and also CWSA workers to want to push for the policy for changes to be made? The failures of the community management approach, the volunteerism and the characteristics of the community management approaches. And the evidence made by a number of data shows that there was a lot of challenges. The COM was not allowing effective management, and there was a lot of water systems that are broken down. The World Bank also did a lot of study. It also showed that the COM was not working. A lot of things was going wrong. And for example, we have a research by Moarty. We also have all this is showing that there's the need for professionalization. So you realize that for a policy entrepreneur to go to make changes, he needs certain things to show. He needs certain conditions. The contextual factors will support his claim that there's a need for us to make changes to the policy. And that is exactly what happened. The COM was not successful, and therefore it enabled changes to be made easily. Then you have something to work on. You have something to stand on to show that this concept, this management approach is not working. What we also had, also another condition that will allow the policy entrepreneur to work is that we had a lot of team building and the use. There's something here.
No, sorry, this is to the audience. Just prepping them for the Q&A when you are done.
Yeah, okay. So we also have the support of the traditional chiefs in some places. District assembly were tired. They don't want to have anything with the small town system because of the politics coming in. The community will not be able to manage the water system very well. And they will have a lot of bills. They don't pay the electricity bills. They will collect the money, but they will not pay the electricity bills. And when the water system breaks down, they come to the district assembly. We need money. If you don't give us money, we will not vote for you. And this is where things go. The chiefs then will come. If you don't do this, we will not vote for you. And the politicians, the chief executive officers, and also the MP will be rushing and say, no, we have to support them. Otherwise, they don't. So because of that, there was no accountability. And therefore, if CWSO want to take over so that they will be relieved of these things, hallelujah, they are in for it. And this is some of the things that enable the policy to move forward. We also had the support from the politicians on all sides. This time, NDC and NPP, they were all in agreement. Everything was okay because it's going to benefit all of them. The MPs will be, they wouldn't have that problem coming from the community. And also access to cabinets based on Valanyo position. And remember, there was a new ministry for water and sanitation. And once you have a new ministry, you have a sector minister. The sector minister have access. I don't know whether he has a cabinet position. I think so. Then you have access to cabinet. Then you can make your policy there. Then you can get the support. You can get the resources in the form of budget so that you can go to push for the reform. And also the new government agenda for creating jobs for the youth. The NPP government needs to show something to the youth that, yes, we are employing you. So if Walanyo have come in with this brilliant idea where in small town water system, we are going to employ accountants, we employ engineers, we employ technicians, why not? And this is an opportunity to create jobs for our youth who are just walking around, and ICT people, for them to be able to give them jobs. These are the enabling conditions to enable the policy to move forward because the things are there to support the policy. So we have more people supporting it than people resisting it. Yeah, okay. So this is my, so we also show that apart from the problems and other things, we also realize that you need a leadership. You need someone who needs to coordinate the whole process. You need someone who needs to come forward and say that we need to do this. This is the process. This is how we have to go about. Because everything, we need someone who needs to be at the forefront. Like Baomia and digitization, everything is about levy, everything. I'm very sure it's going to be FUNRA and everything. So you realize that you need someone who needs to be at the forefront to be able to push some of this agenda. And this is where Walanyo came in, because he had a position as a CEO, and he has worked, he knows the problem, and you need someone to push. We had the Ministry of the Water, Sanitation and Water, who is also the minister. He wants to show that the new ministry, we are producing results. This is what we have done. And through these people together, they were able to come together to be able to push the policy through. And also, availability of non-functioning water system, successful piloted water system. One of the findings, what I found was that they've piloted some of this, the reform in some communities, like Abokobi, it has been piloted over there. And when you go to Adan and the other three districts, they call it 3-district water system. I know Adan, I've forgotten the rest of the communities, but Abokobi, Adan, when you go to the central region, we have a lot of communities like I know when I'm mentioning, like we are seeing Ashanti region, Jasu Obogu. Some of them have been now we are seeing not yet, but Jasu Obogu, and they've piloted. So now community water employs their staff and they pay their staff, and there is less influence. But despite that, although the traditional chiefs are still there, they were part of the process. They were made to bring their inputs. They are there, but they don't have so much control compared to when they have this water and sanitation management team, where it is easy to control them and have access to a lot of revenue and the rest. So the new framework is supposed to ensure that some of these challenges are off. Walano was able to do that as a policy entrepreneur because of his social position, and also because of the enabling, and also because of the condition in the community, or the condition that's made the policy possible. Because the water system were breaking down, people need to see results, people want water, and therefore if there's going to be a new policy to streamline things, why not? And this is how the whole thing came about, and it is still, they are trying to take it to various communities. So in the nutshell, to end, what I'm trying to say is that a policy entrepreneur is someone who try to push policy agenda, who try to make changes to policy, and they're able to use a lot of things to do that. And some of the things they use are their resources that they have, based on their position, based of their knowledge. Like Walano is very knowledgeable. And Walano is a doctor. He has PhD from tech, and he's an engineer, and his focus was on water quality. So he knows what he's talking about. He was able to provide evidence to show why there's a need for us to make changes. And there have been a lot of research which shows that the comp was not the best, and we need new ways to do things. So this factors together, which I talked about, the institutional part of it, the organizational and the contextual factors together, allow the policy entrepreneur to push the policy and to make changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Afrifa. Incidentally, we were talking about, just the idea of policy entrepreneurs in one of our classes this week or last week. So thank you for taking an abstract idea and bringing it to life with these, illustrations of how exactly this works in practice. I also love this real life case study of how policy change happens and all the complexities of it, the different actors and different positions with different interests and different levels of power to influence the process. And then even just, circumstantial things that happen, the political, economic, social environments, and how all of these sort of work together to nudge policy in one direction or another. So thank you. Really fascinating, really interesting research. I will invite people to, as I said in the chat, either raise their hands to be invited to speak or put their questions or comments in the chat section. I say comments especially because in these CSPS policy seminars, we often have people who are working in the areas that are being talked about. So they might have, things to share that might bring further insight or a different perspective to what we just heard. I see Stephen Afrane and then George Johnfair. So in that order, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Just clarification. One is but I thought you wanted to say just before you are taken out of context to say that
the line is not good.
No, we're having a hard time.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll let him come back to his question.
Or he can write the question down.
Or he can write the question down, yes.
Yeah.
Let's go to George then.
Yeah, I think am I clear?
Yes, very clear. Yeah.
Okay, so let me say good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to Director. And let me say, presenter, thanks so much for very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm so much interested, especially when it comes to the policy and entrepreneurs. And just a quick one, I wanted to find out where you place the international community in the whole discourse. You rightly mentioned levy as a point of, illustration. And talking about levy, the very people who were pushing the agenda, even though local, when I talk about local, I'm looking at the Ghanaian policy environment. But yet we had other people who also had interest in whatever that was happening in Ghana. We shouldn't forget that whatever levy could get you, in absence of that, you might want to go to the European bond market where you go and they get so much money. Last year, for example, our total revenue of 72 billion, we had to cough out as much as 35 billion in interest payment. And, they are making so much, from us. So they wouldn't want you to have that space to mobilize, internal resources. And so anything that happens here, they also have interest. Where do you place them? The international community in the discussion.
If you don't mind, we'll take Cynthia and then circle back to Stephen, and then you can answer their questions together.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yeah, it is very clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation too. And I don't know whether I missed it, but if you could kindly help me out with what kind of methodology you used, or maybe let's say a case study for which you are pulling out this analysis for which we have some findings. I'm not very clear on the case you're using and any explanation behind that. I don't know if I missed it, if you could recap then. And then my other question is, who are the people in the structure that you are proposing or what you discussed? And for which reason, what criteria or what else do these policy entrepreneurs need to be apart from the resources? I hear your example of Dr. Olanyo, but apart from him, can you give some of the criteria or the competencies that these policy entrepreneurs need to have for which they will be able to ensure that there's social policy change? I hope my question is clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll take one more. There are a few in the chat, but let's just take Stephen, and so you're not overwhelmed with questions, and then we'll go to the others.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just making the point that you mentioned just kind and I wasn't sure whether you meant just in somebody may take you out of context to say just kind may have interfered with some water project.
Okay.
Okay. You meant, then you have to correct it.
Okay.
My other concern has to, I think it relates to what Cynthia is asking. Is it a case study? Did you use Olanyo as a case study? What you were telling us about him, is it coming from an interview with him, or how did you come by the information you are sharing?
Okay.
So one is the clarification as to what design and method you applied. Is it a case study? And if you are using Olanyo, I was seeing the case study, but how was it done? And then so that I think it fits into what Cynthia is asking.
So as you're answering these questions, in relation to Dr. Domfe's question about international actors, somebody wanted specifically to know whether Danida was involved. so
Okay.
You may go ahead now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, Cynthia, and also George for your questions. So I'm going to start with George. George, you asked about the international community, and Danida, I would say in this particular framework, the beautiful thing of the whole framework was coming from internal. It is not something that the international community did. It's something that was coming from the community water under the leadership of Walanyo, who want to make sure that there are changes in the water policy or changes in the reform. Yes, they had the blessing from the World Bank. For example, what happened was that anytime they had new projects, they don't put the system under community management, but they put it under the new management, which is the utility CWSA, managing the water system. So although the Danida, yes, there is still, what we are trying to do, they are still implementing new policy, projects, like they are still constructing small town water system, but most of them are loans that we've taken and we need to pay back, or maybe they are donations, or maybe they are grants. But it's not something that was kind of suggested by the international community. No, this is something which is very, very local. This is something that is very, very, it is original from us. And that is something that we need. And Danida, as to whether Danida was involved in the early policy, in the early program that is under the National Community Water and Sanitation Program, that is where Danida had a lot of projects that they implemented. So when you talk about small town, it is Danida. So they did a lot. As to whether they are still constructing water system, it is minimal. Because remember, Ghana, we've now moved from our position, and now we are, what is our new position? Is it middle? We are trying to move into the middle, yeah. So
middle income.
Exactly. So we don't really get a lot of support as compared to the past. Secondly, donor support and donor aid is also reducing. So therefore, they are not really supporting as compared to the past. And that is why the idea of trying to ensure that our water system are sustainable has become more of a priority than before. So that is one aspect of it. So the international communities were not so much involved. But if you also want to ask me about the international community, where we can place them, one thing about entrepreneurs is that is one of the criticism about entrepreneurship, is that sometimes you cannot really put one particular person in a specific, that this is a institutional entrepreneur, this is a policy entrepreneur, this is a political entrepreneur, because some of the activities are interrelated. You can have someone who can be, so for example, like Walanyo, I can say he's a political entrepreneur and also a policy entrepreneur. Because from a policy point of view, he initiated, he pushed, because he was in government, and as a political entrepreneur, he uses his position as a politician to be able to do that. And even you can even come into institutional, like, so you realize that when you talk about entrepreneur, you can't fix one particular person there, because some of the activities varies and some people activities changes along the line. That is how I will explain it. And so that is how I will explain. So you can't put them at a particular place, because the international community can be the one who can push the agenda. Like the COM concept was something international organization did. So at that time, we can call them as policy entrepreneurs, because they push for the policy during those era that we need to have community management, we need to involve the community, we need to do this. And in the 1990s, when the new water reforms were being implemented, remember it was coming through the structural adjustment programs and the rest, making sure that government is not part of service, like government is not implementing most of the things, but they normally decentralize and all those kind of things. So they did a lot. So at that time, we can say that they are more of the policy entrepreneur, but you can't really push them into, and now we have what we call there's a new concept we call about collective institutional entrepreneur. So it's like we are moving on and on. That is where we have so many people coming together to push a policy. So this is how it is go. So you can't push them in a particular place. Now I come to Cynthia's question. She asks about the methodology. The beautiful thing is that, not beautiful, the interesting part of the whole thing is that in my PhD, I did 6 cases. And the PhD was on the National Community Water and Sanitation Program. And for the 6 cases, I selected 2 communities in 3 regions. And so in my case, I did in the central region, I did in the Ashanti region, and I did in the northern region. The question you asked me is what are the reasons or my justification for selecting these cases? I selected them based on the availability of resources, because I was a self-funded PhD. So I had no funding. So I have to go to places that I can move around easily. That is number 1. Number 2, I needed to have projects that had similar sponsored. So for example, in the central region, the project was sponsored by the EU. In the Ashanti region, it was sponsored by EU. And also in the northern region, it was supported by CIDA, that's the Canadian International Development Agency. And also another reason why I also picked these cases were based on the physical characteristics of the country. So for example, central region issues of water is different from when it comes to the Ashanti region. It's also different from the northern region. Remember, the further we go to the north, we have challenges of water because of the environment and the way the system has been had the whole issues of the community. So for example, when you go to the central region, which I picked, you realize that they had a lot of boreholes and hand dug wells. So they were not bothered about this small town water system thing. As to whether what they do with the small town water system, they came to put in there, they cannot be bothered. So you realize people were not even utilizing the water system there. So they have high unit cost of production because they had the wells and they have a lot of water. Now, when you move into the Ashanti region, the issue is that it starts changing because remember in Ashanti, we have some places have a lot of rocks because of the gold and other things. So water, some of like Uamasi, for example, have a lot of challenges of water. In the past, they were using a lot of rivers, a lot of streams and the rest. So you realize that water is also a key issue. In the northern region, everyone knows exactly what it is. So based on, these are some of the reasons I chose this particular cases based on the topographical situation of the country, so I can have nuances of implementation, so that if you have cases only in the central region, there are certain things you wouldn't see when you go to the Ashanti region. There are certain things you will see in the northern region, you wouldn't see in the Ashanti region, but you also see in the central region. And it's a matter of seeing differences in implementation and how people respond to the policy. And that's what informed my selection of the cases. Now I move on to today.
Actually, Stephen says that you've clarified his question about design and methods, which is good because I wanted to draw your attention to two questions in the chat, one from Emmanuel Kumi and one from Osman Mensah. So you can read it yourself.
Sorry, Director, it was rather, I'm saying that the question is asking for what design adopted and method. But she's telling us as she chose a case here, chose a case. So it was, did you adopt a case study design? And how did you, I mean, select your cases and how did you plan the design, the method that you use? I think that's what I was trying to, because I saw Walanyo, but I wasn't sure whether you were using.
I'm coming. I am giving
Salomey,
you.
we don't have a lot of time, so maybe brief answer okay, so that other people can also get their questions in. Thank you.
Okay, so should I just summarize?
Yeah, if you can just briefly answer the question about what the was.
Yeah, so the Walanyo case was just a follow-up on my cases from the small from my how do you call it, from the PhD. So when I realized that there was a new reform. So then I followed up, why is there a new reform? And that is how the whole thing so I started reading about the reform because I finished my PhD. I collected the data in 2015 and 2018, and this new thing came around 2017. So I was curious to find out why this how do you call it, reform. So that is how
this paper would be based on a single case study of a policy entrepreneur, or is the case study the like one particular community in the water system?
This case study, this one is not a case study. So I was moving. I talk a lot, so sometimes that's what happened. I was moving from the PhD, and what informed me to get to this particular. So it's like the reform. It's what is prompting me. So it's like just looking at the reform. Okay. And how the reform came into place.
Okay, got you. So,
yeah.
All right. So the quick question from Emmanuel, we know that policy entrepreneurs are not a homogeneous group. So how did the different interests of the actors play out and how were they managed? Which is related also to Osman's question. How did the policy entrepreneur, in this case, this gentleman, manage the resistance from key actors, especially traditional leaders who might have been on the losing end of this policy change?
Yeah, one of the things I found out, and also to answer is it Stephen question? Yes, I interviewed Walanyo myself. I was able to have an opportunity to interview Walanyo to get information from him. And I also interview a lot of CWSC staff, and that is where I got a lot of my information from. And also I went to some of the communities that were piloting to find out what was going on. So I just went to Abokobi because Abokobi is very close to me, and that's the only place. I wanted to go to other places, but I didn't have a lot of time, and I came back. So that's but I intend to expand it. Now, let me go to the question. How do you call it? The question just escaped me again. I was coming close to it. I just forgot. The last part.
So it's Emmanuel is talking about entrepreneurs being like a heterogeneous group. So how did their different interests play out and how were they managed?
Okay, yes, he was, what Walonyo said, based on this interview, said that he involved a lot of stakeholders. So they just didn't go to the community to just tell, we want to get your water. No, they involved the community. There was a lot of discussion, telling them why they need to give out the water and why CWs need to manage the water. So the process was very participatory, and based on this understanding, then the communities then decide say that, okay, you can take it up. And the key issue is that most of these water systems they pick up were broken down water system. The water system had a lot of challenges. So they said that, okay, if we take the water system and we repair, we are going to take it to manage it by ourselves. So of course, if I need water and you're going to repair and manage it, I'll give it out. But before that, they had a lot of intervention. They had a lot of stakeholders meetings, and the process was clear, and each one's responsibility roles was clear, and everything was written down and signed so that everyone is committed to that particular thing, to the particular process. Yeah, that's what happened.
And the second one, which is sort of similar, is how did the policy entrepreneur manage resistance from key actors, especially traditional leaders who may have lost out, I guess, in terms of control over the water system?
Yeah, they are still fighting the traditional leaders. Like a place like Uyamwasi, they've not given out the water. They are still managing under Akom. Then, and especially we have most of these issues in the Ashanti region, and you understand why. We have a very strong traditional, so it's like, it depends on wherever they are going. So there is a lot of resistance by some of the traditional chiefs, but dialogue, and that's what they are using right now. They are not forcing anyone. And as Walanyo said in his interview, said that if you go, they said that, yes, go and take the water, and you forced to take it, of course you'll not be successful. You need to dialogue, you need to sit with them and explain why they need, and even they have not been left out, because now they have what we call the community relation officer who still works with the traditional chiefs. And if there are issues, they go to the traditional chiefs. This is the problem, help us to solve it. So there is this communication, there is this support between the traditional chiefs and also the community water officers. So there's this enabling environment. But remember, it's not going to be the same in every community. So every community and the medicine that they have to give. Some need paracetamol, others will need chloroquine. So that is how they are going about right now.
Okay, so we are out of time, but I'm going to just, misuse my powers as chair and ask my last question, which you feel free to answer very briefly. But I'm a huge fan of participation, and the water and sanitation kind of design of having community, water and sanitation volunteers and so on was based on this idea of participatory development, of getting people, even so-called beneficiaries, involved in implementation and design and monitoring and evaluation. So I was very sad to hear that this doesn't actually seem to work very well. And I think you mentioned that the research, empirical research, shows that it doesn't work very well. So is this sort of an isolated case, or does this really maybe attack the heart of participation in a way? Because this is one of the areas where participatory development was really rolled out with water and sanitation.
No, it has not been ruled out. No. We are still, there's a lot of participation going on as far as water is concerned. But the only thing is that the difference is that it has been well structured now. Before that, the whole thing, the institutional arrangement was a little bit not well coordinated. So sometimes if there's any conflict, there's no direct information or access and channels to have conflict resolution. But now there are channels and things have been well structured. So let me give you an example to buttress my point. For example, with the community relation officer, she has the WhatsApp page or WhatsApp app, and the communities are on the WhatsApp. So now, if there's any issues concerning water, before there was nothing like that. You don't even know who to report. So you go to either the chief, and the chief will call the water and say that this is not going on well, and they were using their powers to do what they want to do. It does not also mean that the chiefs were always against and doing the bad things. No, there were places where they supported the program, where when there are people not doing the right thing, the chief uses the power to correct things, to make sure things happen. So the chief's position, it's not always negative, it's positive and negative. So now with the community relation officer, they are the bridge between community water and the community. So now we have a channel that have been institutionalized so that when there is any issue on water, you know where to go. If you have a problem with your vendor, you know where to go. And the WhatsApp is allowing them to communicate. It is easy. So there is this problem, this vendor is charging us higher than before. And you can be able to move. So there is still participation, but it's even better than before because people now have voices using the mobile phone. And that is something that someone can consider as a research topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Students, you hear that? I'm really torn between my insistence that we stick to time so that people, don't.
Yeah. Tomorrow is Easter.
That they can come to CSPS seminars and then we never end on time. On the other hand, it seems like you are sparking a lot of interest. So Salomey, I'm going to challenge you, like 30 seconds for each one of these questions. One is, what was the levels of collaboration with NGOs who are already implementing such projects in some communities? And then one was a question about the survival of policies beyond the lifespan of a policy entrepreneur. When that policy entrepreneur leaves or loses interest or whatever happens, how are these projects sustained? And then I'm just going to have to end it there because otherwise we'll go on forever. But
yeah, okay. So quickly, the collaboration of the NGOs. Some of the NGOs really resisted. And the collaboration is through dialogue. They are still talking. And also, what Walanyo also said is that most of the time, you need to show evidence on whatever is going on. Whatever project we're doing, is it successful or not? And that evidence needs to speak for itself. So some of the NGOs, yes, are collaborating. And also, we also have people who are talking they are not comfortable because of their interest there. But there is still stakeholders and people are still talking. So as an NGO, they need to also talk. But now they need to institutionalize everything and make sure that CWSA is in charge so that you have a head and everyone then follows. Before that, everyone was doing everything. So that is the other aspect of it. And the survival of policies, yes, this framework, but remember, it's not just a policy. It's going to be passed in Parliament very soon. I think it has been passed or it's about to be passed because they've done everything. This is a framework and it's going to be passed as a legislative instrument or act. It's going to be passed as an act. So once it is passed, I think the survivor definitely will be there because if something is bad, means it has been well itemized. Everything has been well structured. Yeah. The actors are there and the channels of communication, everything have well been done and institutionalized. So,
and I think really what you're talking about with policy entrepreneurs is it's talking about the sort of policy formulation stage. This is how you even get a policy done. And I suppose the survival, the institutionalization that Emmanuel Yeboah is asking about, it's about once the policy is passed, then who are the other actors who come in to make sure it's implemented and it's sustained? Because the policy entrepreneur would have done their job, just push the policy to get it formulated. So, yeah. And a very last one is a comment. It's just from Patricia Kufu-Hineku, who is saying that she found it interesting to hear that community ownership can in some cases counter policy change. and that she just has a better appreciation of the role of policy entrepreneur. So I think that's a very good note, good thank you note to end it on. Really grateful for your time. It's not often that you get somebody who's done a lot of practice, so knows the nitty-gritties, but is also applying sort of a theoretical conceptual framework to the things that they already know and have experienced. So we really do want to thank you for your time and for this very interesting presentation, as Setonyo Vito said in the chat. And I would like to also thank everybody who attended and who stayed, even though we ran a little bit over. We really appreciate your taking the time out to join us. We're going to
also share, you can also share my email, those who are interested. Yeah.
Oh yes, please feel free to type it in the chat box. So just as we round up, so that people can get in touch. I'm sure they would appreciate that. Dr. Adjoa Yabua Japan is our seminar coordinator for this semester, and she will be reaching out to all of you again for our next seminar. We are trying to do this every couple of weeks. And of course, as usual, we'll send the announcement and the pre-registration notice ahead of time. Yes, Dr. Lo, we will have the recording. We have a YouTube page. Surprise, surprise. So
I would like to look at it. Yeah.
If Dr. Afrifa doesn't mind, we'll just make sure that she's okay with it, and then we'll share it so that other people who didn't get a chance to come in today will have the benefits of this really interesting presentation. So thank you so much, Dr. Afrifa. Thank you, everybody, and have a great Easter weekend.
Yeah, thank you too for the opportunity also to present my paper to everyone. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to everyone.